Most of us don't watch films to be confused and left scratching our heads. Rather, we want to be thrilled, amused, or emotionally moved. But sometimes directors get the urge to push back against complacent audiences and offer up a provocation, whether for better or for worse. In some cases, these films are largely respected and held up by critics as successful subversions of conventional narrative filmmaking, while in others, they were torn asunder for making a pretentious attempt to talk down to viewers. Whatever the end result, these films didn't make any concessions for those paying money to watch them, hoping instead that audiences would relish having their film-going metal tested with a workout for the brain. With that in mind, I'm Will for What Culture, and here are 10 movies directors didn't want you to understand. 10. Only God Forgives. Some films just love to troll and confuse the audience, and this was prominently felt in 2013's Only God Forgives, the follow-up to the art house action hit Drive. The film, starring Ryan Gosling, was marketed as a similarly motivated effort for the martial arts genre, melding a slow pace and minimal dialogue with shocking bursts of violence. However, director Nicholas Refn refused to give viewers Drive 2.0, and more than that, he deliberately imbued the film with a number of abstract, psychologically opaque scenes. While you can try to absorb Only God Forgives as a simple crime thriller about crime and punishment, it's clear that the team behind the film wanted to alienate as many fans of Drive as possible with this self-consciously surrealist romp. 9. Mulholland Drive. Arguably David Lynch's defining work, Mulholland Drive scooped him a Best Director Oscar nomination, despite the fact that it makes little attempt to outline a clear narrative path for the audience. Though the most widely accepted reading of the film suggests that the film's two sections represent the idealized fantasy and nightmarish reality of a failed actress, Lynch has characteristically avoided lending any specific meaning to the story's outcome. Amusingly, he even refused to include chapter selection options in earlier home video releases of the movie, encouraging viewers to take it in as a singular experience without skipping around to specific scenes. 8. Inherent Vice. If audiences struggled to make complete sense of Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master, his follow-up Inherent Vice proved even more adverse to conventional narrativity. Ultimately, it's best viewed as a mood piece in which the audience follows around a stoner hippie for 2.5 hours. Trying to recount the A to Z plot is a thankless task, and one which Anderson would likely discourage. Unsurprisingly, the film sparked mass walkouts upon release, given that the marketing sold the film as a more typical detective yarn than the acid-tinged ellipsis that it actually was. 7. Cloud Atlas. It's easy to see why, despite its all-star cast, strong reviews, and gorgeous visual effects, Cloud Atlas failed to impress the mainstream, given its off-the-wall narrative spanning 6 different time periods. While it's clear that much of the story is rooted in the notion of past lives, it can't be interpreted too literally in that vein because the narrative threads don't neatly all slot together. The movie's tagline, "Everything is connected," offers up the most salient distillation of the movie's primary theme, that though you might not understand quite how everyone relates to one another, it is an immutable law of nature, if not physics, that humanity is bound inseparably. Or at least it's something like that. 6. Primer. Produced for just $7,000, Primer sees director Shane Carruth telling a time travel tale that's as grounded and realistic as possible, with the focal characters, one played by himself, largely using obscure scientific jargon to relay ideas, rather than making concessions for the audience's sake. Between this and the mumbly, low-quality dialogue recordings, Primer is quite the headache to unpack even without subtitles, and even with them, it's not much easier. Pile on the top of this a head-spinning time travel plot, and you've got a recipe for a movie that requires viewers to put their phones away and pay the utmost attention. Though there are entire fan sites devoted to unraveling the movie's jumbled timelines, many may simply be left too exhausted to consider diving any deeper into this crazy headspace. 5. Rubber. This satirical horror film about a rubber tire coming to life and exploding people's heads is a monument to the absurdity of both art and life. Rubber literally opens with a monologue which claims that all great films, without exception, contain an important element of no reason. And you know why? Because life itself is filled with no reason. Though some have interpreted Rubber as a commentary on the nature of cinema itself, the clear audience directive from the outset is to embrace its general nonsensical series of events, and accept that not everything needs a clear-cut explanation. 4. I'm thinking of ending things. If Charlie Kaufman's filmography has taught us anything, it's that he isn't tethered to a strictly defined reality or singular worldview of any kind. For anyone who's cast their eyes upon his first 2 directorial efforts, it won't be terribly surprising that his new Netflix film, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, is cut from a similar cloth. Though the first half of the film can be taken relatively literally, Kaufman increasingly distorts reality throughout the second, such that short of reading up on the more clear-cut nature of the source novel, it's tough to know what to make of it at all. It is a brilliantly acted film, which begs repeat viewings, though it's also fair to say that the poor souls unfamiliar with Kaufman who stumble upon this thing won't have any idea what they're getting themselves into. 3. Holy Motors. Films don't get much stranger or more unforgettable than Holy Motors, a fantasy drama following a man who spends an entire day performing a series of elaborate acting routines out in the world. The reason for this is never really explained, although some might see it as a metaphor for the life of an actor. Still, Holy Motors is probably best enjoyed as a series of performance pieces, all carried out with spectacular gusto by Denis Lavant. The second you give yourself over to its profoundly weird sensory assault, Holy Motors becomes a shining example of how great films need not be understood, just felt. 2. Tenet. If Nolan's last few films have granted a clear preference to music and sound effects over dialogue, that artistic choice is dialed up to 11 for Tenet, whereby huge chunks of important dialogue are scarcely audible beneath walls of bombastic music and ambient sound. In a Q&A last year, Nolan's regular sound editor Richard King attempted to explain Nolan's approach to deliberately obfuscating the dialogue. Chris is trying to create a visceral, emotional experience for the audience, beyond merely an intellectual one. Like punk rock music, it's a full-body experience, and dialogue is only one facet of the sonic palette. The unfortunate irony, of course, is that for a film which has been hailed as cinema's great savior, for most it will be more comprehensible when viewed at home with subtitles. 1. Siriana. This 2005 political thriller impressively landed a Best Original Screenplay Oscar nomination, despite Siriana being labelled as confusing by everybody who dared to watch it. Siriana spreads itself across 4 separate storylines, each of them dense and complex in their own way. And the director's gone on to say he made the plot intentionally confusing, presumably in an attempt to reflect the muddy web of big oil politics itself, which is the subject the film tackles. Though Siriana is certainly a workout for the mind and absolutely an attention-testing movie, the strong ensemble cast make it absolutely worth the potential headache. Just accept that there's plenty of stuff intended to fly clean over your head. And there you have it, folks, 10 movies directors didn't want you to understand. Feel free to drop this video a like if you enjoyed it, and drop me a follow on Twitter at YouSlideDow. I'm Will for What Culture, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.